finally, the last section that we went over in Chapter 9 was solving quadratics using the quadratic formula. I'm not sure how many, if any of you, listened to the Pop Goes the Weasel quadratic formula song, but that helps you remember what the quadratic formula is. So that's the first step for these problems, is write out the quadratic formula, so that way you know what you're trying to do. My PC battery is low. Okay, so x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's our quadratic formula. That's what we're going to be using to solve both problems 15 and 16. So the first step now, I guess second step because we just wrote the formula. Second step is let's label what a, b, and c are. That way we know where to plug our numbers in. And while we're figuring out where to plug our numbers in, I'm going to plug in my computer. Okay, so let's look at our equation that we were given, m squared minus m minus 20. Remember, it's normally ax squared plus bx plus c. So that means our a here is the number in front of the m squared. When there's no number, it's a 1. Our b here is a negative 1, the number in front of the m. And our c is a negative 20, the number with no variable. All right, now we go ahead and plug in. So x equals negative from the formula, then a negative 1 because a b is a negative 1, plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared, minus 4 times 1, which is a, times c, which is negative 20, all over 2 times 1, which is a. So now we need to simplify. So what I like to do, and what you should do, is you need to look at the square root part first. So this becomes negative 1 squared, just becomes a positive 1. A negative 4 times a 1 times a negative 20 becomes a positive 80. So if we simplify this whole thing, we get x equals, what does minus a negative become? A positive, right? So we just have 1 plus or minus the square root of, what's 1 plus 80? 81. All over 2 times 1, which is just 2. All right, so again, we're looking at the square root. Can we simplify the square root of 81 anymore? Why, yes, we can. The square root of 81 is 9. Now notice I did not write the square root of 9. We took the square root, so the square root is gone. We just have the number 9 now. If you write the square root of 9, it is not the square root of 9. The square root of 81 does not equal the square root of 9. The square root of 81 just equals the number 9. Okay, so we want to actually get our two answers for this problem. So I'm going to break this into two separate fractions. I have either x equals 1 plus 9 over 2, or x equals 1 minus 9 over 2. So if I do 1 plus 9, that makes a 10 over 2, which is a 5. If I do 1 minus 9, that's negative 8 over 2, which is a negative 4. So I get x equals 5 and negative 4. Those are my answers to problem number 15 using the quadratic formula. Yes, I know you could look at that problem and factor it, but that's not what the directions are asking you to do. I am trying to test you on all of the learning intentions for the chapter, so I do need you to show me using the method that I'm asking you to use because I want to make sure you learned how to use that method. And finally, the last problem on your practice test. Again, we're using the quadratic formula, so I'm not going to rewrite it. I'm just going to highlight it from the other side. So we're using this highlighted formula over here. In problem number 16, our A is still 1, our B here is 6, and our C is negative 11. So we're going to plug that in. So we have x equals negative B, so negative 6, plus or minus the square root of B squared, so 6 squared, minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is negative 11, all over 2A, so 2 times 1. Now, if you recall, the first thing we need to do is simplify this square root. So 6 squared is 36. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 11 is a positive 44. So we end up with x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 80 all over 2. Alrighty, so we're trying to simplify now the square root, just like we did before when it was the square root of 81. So let's look at the square root of 80. Are there any perfect squares inside of 80? Yes, there are. 80 is 16 times 5. So if I break 80 into 16 by 5, this problem becomes x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 16 times the square root of 5 all over 2. What is the square root of 16 though? It's 4, right? So we get x equals negative 6 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 5 all over 2. But wait, do you notice how the 6, the 4 can be divided by 2? So we're going to do that. We're going to simplify this as much as possible. Some of you might see this better if you actually broke this into 2 separate fractions. So negative 6 over 2 plus or minus 4 square root of 5 over 2. Do you see how those are fractions that can be simplified? So we're going to go ahead and simplify those. So we get x equals negative 3 plus or minus 4 divided by 2 is just 2 square root of 5. And that, my friends, is our final answer for the last problem on your Chapter 9 practice test. So hopefully if you decided to watch all these videos, I give you mad props. I think you will be very successful on your test if you are able to do these independently and you maybe reviewed or refreshed with these videos. If you didn't need to use all these videos and you just watched those specific problems that you had questions with, that's great too. I hope these were helpful to you in some way, and I really believe you will do well on your tests. If you're worried, please don't worry. Please reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. Remember that I do have office hours this week, every day from noon to 2:30. If those times don't work for you, please email me and we will schedule an a separate time. But yeah, that is your practice test. You are expected to submit pictures of your practice test to our Schoology class page. Whether you watch this whole video or not, you are expected to do this and submit pictures. So that way I know you practiced for our test.